Hi everybody, it's Julessa. Today we're going to do part 2 of the Signet ring project, and what that means is we're going to take the two sides of the ring, we're going to flatten them and make sure that they're cleaned up and ready to go for soldering. Then we're going to solder on each side, and with each side's cleanup we'll cut out the holes for the ring part. So let's go ahead and get started. So now's the time to take a good look at your solder joints, and on this side I can see my solder joint looks really good. It's all the way through, all the way around, there are no gaps. Same with this side. So what we're going to do now is clean up the edge on one side and then the other so that we can have a flat area in which to solder the sides on. Okay, this side is done. Now I want to do the other side. This one I'm probably going to have to use my file. I've got an edge over on this end that's a little bit taller than the inner band, and I want it to be even, and if I try just sanding it, it's going to take forever. So I'm going to file it. And I have a ring holder. This thing comes in very handy. It's inside the ring holder. This comes in very handy, so if you don't have one, you may want to think about buying one. Now remember, your files only work the best on the forward motion. If you seesaw back and forth like this, you're actually going to be dulling your file. So I recommend only using it on the forward motion. Keeps your files nice and sharp. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side just to make sure. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to go back to my sandpaper. And I want the sanding to be even all the way up through the legs of the top part of the ring. And the best way to check this will be when we're ready to put the side on. Make sure that all the edges all the way up from the rear to the front, the rear to the front were actually completely flat and there are no gaps so that the soldering can happen properly. That was good so far. I'm using a 320 grit sandpaper right now. I want to keep it pretty coarse so I can take some decent amount of material off it during my sanding. And doing it flat on my sandpaper like this is doing two things. One, it's taking away material, and two, it's keeping my edges flat in a pretty consistent basis all the way around the ring. If you go in the figure 8, it also helps to keep that consistency with your sanding. I'm trying to do it here with my left hand. I don't draw 8s with my left hand very often. As you can tell, I go back to my dominant hand. It's much easier. Got just a little bit more to go. And there's a trick that I want to show you. Take a Sharpie if you want to make sure that you're sanding flat on all edges. Take a Sharpie and mark all the way around. And then that way, as you're filing or sanding, as the Sharpie goes away and disappears, you know your edges are flat. So I'll do that side first and then I'll go back around to the other. And what I'm looking for is any low spots. You can see there's still Sharpie there. That means there's a low spot. So I need to continue sanding to get rid of that Sharpie. And I still have just a smidge on that outside edge, so I'm going to go ahead and keep sanding it until it's completely gone, and then we'll flip it over and do the other side. That looks good. So now what I can actually do is take my file, clean up the outside just a little bit, check my joint. My joint looks pretty good all the way through. Fix my little arms here. I don't want them to be soldered crooked to my ring, so I need to fix those a little bit. Okay, so before I solder on my sides, I want to check the height here. I've got a little bit too much height on my ends, so what I want to do is sand and file that down to where it's a lower profile. So I'm going to go back to my sanding paper. Get my file again. That should do it. Now it's even. So I've got my ring flattened to fit exactly on my back plate here. What we're doing is soldering on the back side here a plate so that we can make the box up here on the top and actually thicken the ring up a little bit. I'm going to put my flux all over the back plate and on my ring. And you'll notice I moved my ring on top of a charcoal block, and the reason for that is because I want the reflection of the heat to come off the block and help me heat up the whole piece at the same time so that my solder will flow. Now I'm going to place my solder, and the trick to this is to place your solder on the inside of the ring and the inside of the two pieces that are actually sticking out top. And the reason for that is as you're heating it around the outside, you want the solder to flow through the joints on the bottom, and you know when you get a nice little ring of solder around the bottom of your piece, you know that the solder has flowed all the way through. So let's go ahead and set our solder in here. And it's okay to be generous with your solder here because you want to make sure that the joint is completely covered. Next thing I'm going to do is place my solder on the inside here. On both sides of the legs. The other reason why I put it on my charcoal block is because my charcoal block is on a rotating pan here. And the reason for that is because I want to be able to make my turns and make sure I get my solder completely around the entire ring. And like I said, I'm going to be generous with the solder in here because I want to make sure that it goes completely around. Okay, I think that's enough. So now I'm going to light my torch. I'm going to heat from the outside in. I'm going to try not to let my solder bubble up a little bit too much with the flux. Before I start to really heat it, I'm going to make sure my flux is completely up against the walls here. I'm keeping the heat on it so that the flux will be soft and I can move my solder. Okay, I think that's good. Let's check these inner ones. Now I can go ahead and heat. There's a couple in here that are not totally up against the wall, so I can see my solder coming through the wall and creating a nice little band all the way around my ring here. Make sure it does it on the inside as well. I think that's going to about do it. Go back around it just to make sure I've got it all the way through. I think that's it. So now I'm going to quench this and pickle it and get ready for the cleanup around the edges. And as you can see, I've got a nice little solder line all the way around the piece, even on the inside here where the ring is. It looks really good. So I'm going to go ahead and quench and pickle that piece for us. My work is out of the pickle, and as you can see, I have a nice solder ring all the way around. So I know that my solder is flowing all the way through, and I also see a nice solder ring on the inside there. So now what I'm going to do is cut off the excess copper here. I'm leaving a little bit of excess so that I can file that off later. Okay, so now what you should have is a full back plate. You should also have a small edge here because we're going to file that off later. Now the next thing we've got to do is drill a hole in the center here so we can cut out that inner ring. Now I've got my hole, and I'm going to put my saw blade through that and start cutting. I'm doing the same thing on the inner part of the ring as I'm leaving a little excess so I can file that out later. I'm being careful not to catch my finger on that blade because on the downstroke that hurts. Did a little bit of burr lube here. Starting to get sticky. There we go. So now we've got the inside cut out. We've got the excess cut off the back side. And now it's time to prep this side for the other box end. And as you can see, I've got a little bit of a lip here on the box end because it's easier for me to trim that down once I have all the pieces soldered together. Okay, so I'm going to clean up this other side with my sandpaper. I'm going to use my Sharpie trick to make sure that all the edges are sanded straight and flat. Because So I want this to rest flat up against my back plate here. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we're going to move back to the soldering block. Now there's one thing I didn't mention before when we soldered the other side of the plate on, and that is before I put this down, I actually cleaned it with a degreasing soap, and I used a Scotch-Brite pad to kind of give it a little bit of tooth. That way the solder has something to hold on to a little bit better. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing on this side as we did the other. We're going to go ahead and flux the whole ring, flux the back plate, and we're going to put our solder on the inside of the joints. And just like before, we're going to be generous with the solder. Okay, I think we're ready to go now. And as before, we're going to heat from the outside, get that flux completely heated, fix any of the solder pieces that may have jumped around. We've got a few in here. You want to make sure the solder is touching both the wall of the ring and the bottom plate. Okay, now we're going to heat it all the way around. Oh, we got a couple of not touching in there. Okay. Okay, now it's starting to flow. I've got my heat in here quick and fast because I want to make sure that it flows all the way through. Go back around it again. And I think we're done. So now we've got both sides soldered on. We've cut out the center holes for the finger. And now it's time to do the cleanup. I'm not going to do too much cleanup because I still have to solder the top here. And when I get to that section, I'll go ahead and stop the fast forward so you can see that part, getting it ready for the final solder joint. So in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up this ring with my files. In today's episode, part 2 of the Signet ring project, we soldered on the sides to the hollow form ring. In the next part, we're going to solder on the top part of the ring and get ready for the final polishing and the final cleanup. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye!